into banking, whether it's France or the U.S. or Argentina or somebody. They would get into the press. They would take control of chambers of commerce, of labor unions. Part of the plan was people were to be conditioned to a stage where they couldn't trust their political leaders. Now, I'll just read this. This is from Sumner Wells, who found out about the secret plan. He said only part of it is revealed now. He says these guys are being trained to appear as men of large commercial or financial interests who will be able to dispose of considerable amounts of capital derived from the reserves which the German General Staff has already during the past years deposited under one guise or another in neutral countries. Each agent will be able to cultivate a circle of indirect and unknowing accomplices, nationals of the country where he is stationed, who can determine opinion, control industrial production, and influence the results of elections. So you get an idea, like the American election, like today, that sort of stuff, or in England, whatever. So it's a really comprehensive plan they had developed, controlling and bringing off. They said in 2 generations, the plan would come to fulfillment. They had allied with the Muslim Brotherhood beginning in the 1930s, so all this ISIS stuff, Middle East crisis, is all part of it, and it's coming to fulfillment today.
How did they morph into merging with, we call them the One Worlders, this movement that started with Colonel Edward Mandell House, Council on Foreign Relations?
Yeah, it was the American counterpart of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which that grew out of the Round Table groups, which part of Cecil Rhodes's secret society of the elect to, as he said, quote, take the government of the whole world.
So how did it morph or merge into where we're headed now? Because you can see what's going on, that if you zoom out of the elections and the acrimony that's going back and forth right now, you understand that these two sides are being pinged against each other, as you've said, in order to move us into different directions. That's why the Brexit is so threatening, because it fractures this idea of regional unity, which they all believe and wrote about. Like you said, you can go and read what they were talking about. The end run around sovereignty by forming regional ties.
That's what they said.
That's why they're going so ballistic over Brexit.
Yeah, well, they have challenges. They have contingency plans. And you have to remember that the secret Nazi plan is a sub-part of the larger Paraleeds plan, which has gone on for a long time. And actually, what you're talking about, Brexit and all, is actually sort of a little blip. But what they do is they actually like crises. They like challenges. They like chaos, order ob chaos. They've pitted for centuries Protestants against Catholics, Sunnis against Shia, Arabs against Jews and all that. And they like that because that's all part of a dialectical process where you have the two sides against each other and eventually there's a synthesis. Sometimes it's a synthesis brought about by economic coercion. Sometimes it's a synthesis brought about by, we just got tired of killing each other and so let's all sit down at a table. And ultimately that's what's supposed to happen according to one of these insiders, H.G. Wells, when he wrote these various books. He wrote about the Open Conspiracy, Blueprint for World Revolution. He had been a Fabian socialist. He broke with them not in terms of philosophy, but just he didn't think they should be secret anymore. They should come out in the open. And so he wrote a book called The Shape of Things to Come in 1933, where he was very specific. There'll be a Second World War around 1939. Not eventually, but 1939, and roughly that's when it occurred. And then he wrote the book The New World Order, where he said, coming out of a conference in Basra, Iraq, this world state will eventually merge in 50 years or so. So their plan is through conflict and through crises, they will bring this off. And it's not just through Brexit, like you said. It involves multifaceted layers, like you'll have 9/11, right? And before 9/11, everybody thought it was really important to have our freedom, right? But the very afternoon of 9/11, Washington Post, ABC came out with a poll showing the results were 2/3 of the American people would be willing to give up a lot of their freedom for security. And so they have these probes, these psychological tests. And so what this may be is one of their tests that's going on. But believe me, they've developed contingency plans for how to handle that. And also the world currency is supposed to come out through a forthcoming, not too far in the future, global economic crisis so that people would be willing to accept the world currency by 2018.
We do know the dollar's coming up to a crisis, and people are yelling, that'll be the collapse of the world and civilization as we know it, and get your guns and groceries and head to the hills because we'll have to go back to bartering and all that. And I go, you've got to be kidding me. The powers that be, as I call them, the PTBs, they know what's coming. They are already working Once again, our friend Henry Kissinger was shuttling over to Putin. Pravda carried an article about, I think it was 2 months ago, about they were discussing the new currency, the new emerging order in the world, that there are two vying factions for this, of what this new globalism is looking like. They know this is coming, and they are prepared for the next stage of it.
Yeah, about 6 years ago, I think Gordon Brown was head of Parliament, Prime Minister, and he said the only thing that's going to save us is a constitution for a global economic system. I think he may even use the word currency in that. So they give these little notifications in advance, but people might be thinking, well, all this sounds speculative and it's conspiratorial and maybe it's true, but, who of any prominence is agreeing with you, Cuddy? And so that's why I try to put people who have been in a position to know from the inside. And by that, I don't just mean the quotes of Woodrow Wilson or Colonel House or FDR when he wrote to Colonel House about there's a financial element that's owned our government, or even David Rockefeller with his quote from his book Memoirs in 2002 where he says he's part of a secret cabal conspiring against the best interests of the United States in order to form a more integrated global political and economic structure. But you would have a person like L. Fletcher Prouty. He wasn't just a military guy. He was the one in charge of covert operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he wrote a number of things. He wrote about JFK's assassination and so on. But once again, let me just read this real quick, because it's important that this comes from a person who is at such a strategic point high up. He says there's evidence of a long-range view of grand strategy, capitalize that, from the level above the leaders that we know in public. The power elite, he uses that term, had already set plans in motion for a post-World War II period that we have known as the Cold War. This is one of the best examples I've found revealing the work of the power elite as distinct from that of the men who were the visible national leaders. As World War II came to a close, the long-range Cold War plan was already in existence, filling the vacuum by the end of that conflict. The long-range plan decision had to have originated from a center of power above the Roosevelt-Churchill-Stalin level, because it ignored the World War II alliance represented by those three wartime leaders and went its own independent way. The type of evidence he's referring to is, he states as follows: the active role of U.S. Army officials in the unprecedented move of Hitler's own intelligence chief, General Reinhard Gehlen, directly into the U.S. Army as an officer by a special act of Congress. This was not a casual incident. The move, planned before the end of the war with Germany and directed from the top, was a classic example of the work of the power elite. Our leaders are all fine actors and certainly not true rulers. This is true not only in the world of politics, but is equally true of banking, industry, academia, and religion. So this is Prouty. He's, head of our covert operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and this is how he's talking. So he knows these things.
Well, we're out of time, but it's interesting. I just wanted to poke behind the scenes right here, because the more I watch what's going on, and people are going to be disappointed again. I think the left was disappointed in Obama. I think the right will be disappointed in Trump. If Hillary's in, they're going to be disappointed in her. But you can see this whole thing moving, and people are not watching the real maneuverings going in the background, which tell you really where we're going to be headed.
That's right. The visible people are puppets.
Okay, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, any books you'd like to promote? I know you've written a lot of them.
The book here that we're talking about mainly is The Power Elite, The Secret Nazi Plan. Then I had one after that called The Power Elite, Their History and Future, if you want to know who these people are, and they go back at least 400 years or so, and there's many things in there that are very interesting, like what really happened to the Oklahoma City bombing. It's not what you think. And then the latest one is titled Conspiracy, and that's more of a how book. It's how the conspiracy is brought about, and I actually have sort of a dialogue in there. I mentioned Common Core, which is a hot topic today, and I also show how I have a better prediction rate than the FBI, CIA, or NSA on predicting what terrorist activities are planned, because in one of my April 29th column of 2013 on News with Views, as I indicate in this book, I predicted terrorists could do 5 things, and they did all 5 within 2 weeks. And I think I'm going to write an article in the near future about how this election seems somewhat similar to 1940, what's going on. It's sort of like the election of 1992 was a repeat of 1912.
And let's hear it for Neville Chamberlain, too, while we're at it.
Absolutely. Truth, peace, in our time. That's what we got. You bet.
All right, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, your articles at newswithfuse.com. We have pushed the clock to the wall. You pray for us for provision and protection, physical